Isabella Torres had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl. The white gown, the shimmering chandeliers, the sea of roses, everything about the Crystal Crown Hotel screamed perfection. Guests whispered in awe about the fairy tale wedding between a rising CEO and a beautiful young bride. Photographers jostled for the best angle, eager to capture a picture-perfect moment that would soon dominate society pages. To the world, it was a dream. To Isabella, 6 months pregnant and glowing, it was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But happiness can shatter in a single breath. Moments before she was to walk down the aisle, Isabella slipped into a quiet corridor to calm her nerves. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them on her swollen belly. "It's all for you," she whispered softly to her unborn child. "A safe home, a strong family." She believed those words, until a voice echoed from the next room. It was Nicholas Hale, her groom, the man she thought adored her. His deep tone was low but unmistakable. Isabella froze. "I'll sneak away after the vows," Nicholas whispered into his phone. His chuckle was sharp, cruel. "You know you're the only one I want, Sabrina. This wedding is just for the investors. Be patient, baby. Tonight you're mine." The words pierced Isabella's chest like glass. She pressed herself against the wall, her breath caught between disbelief and dread. Her fiancé, her future husband, was calling his mistress minutes before pledging eternal love to her. The baby kicked suddenly, as if sensing her heartbreak. Tears welled up, but she dared not make a sound. The image of Nicholas kneeling with a ring, promising to cherish her, replayed in her mind. Every sweet moment, every tender kiss, they crumbled into lies. She remembered the nights he came home late, reeking of cologne that wasn't hers. The unexplained business trips. The way he avoided her eyes when she asked if he was happy. She had buried her doubts under hope, convincing herself love was stronger than fear. Now the truth was undeniable. Outside, the orchestra struck the first notes of the bridal march. Guests rose in anticipation. The wedding planner tapped gently at the dressing room door. "Isabella, it's time." Her legs shook, her chest tightened, but she knew she couldn't stay hidden. All eyes were waiting. The world expected a smiling bride. And yet inside her heart, everything had collapsed. She glanced at her reflection, her flawless makeup now streaked with silent tears. For a fleeting second, she considered running, but where would she go? Her family, her guests, her reputation, everything hinged on this moment. Still, Nicholas's words burned in her ears. "You're the only one I want, Sabrina." And as Isabella stepped toward the aisle, forcing a trembling smile, she whispered to herself, "They have no idea what's about to happen." Before the dress, before the chandeliers, before the cameras, there was just Isabella Torres. She wasn't born into privilege. Her story began in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Miami, where cracked sidewalks and rusted fences painted the backdrop of her childhood. Her father was a mechanic who worked double shifts to keep food on the table. Her mother, a seamstress, mended gowns for rich women who never remembered her name. Life was not easy, but it was honest. Isabella grew up learning how to make beauty from scraps. While other little girls played with dolls, she sketched dresses on the back of grocery receipts. By the time she was 16, she was sewing her own clothes. She dreamed not of mansions or yachts, but of love. The kind of steady, unwavering love her parents had shared despite hardship. That dream carried her through years of study. She earned a degree in fine arts, working nights as a waitress to pay tuition. Her professors praised her creativity, her ability to see light where others saw only shadows. But no amount of talent could shield her from exhaustion. By graduation, she was a woman with big dreams, but little else. Then Nicholas Hale entered her life. He wasn't just a man. He was a promise. A tall, magnetic CEO whose sharp suits and sharper smile seemed to command every room. To Isabella, he was the embodiment of everything she thought she lacked. Power, security, a future carved in glass towers and boardrooms. When he noticed her at a charity art show, she thought it was a mistake, but Nicholas pursued her relentlessly. Expensive dinners, flowers delivered to her classroom, whispers of "You deserve the world, Bella." He made her feel seen, wanted, loved. Within a year, they were inseparable. Nicholas painted pictures of a future where she wouldn't have to struggle anymore. "You won't work yourself to the bone," he'd tell her. "You'll be my queen." For a girl who had only known sacrifice, it was intoxicating. When Isabella discovered she was pregnant, she was terrified. She worried Nicholas would see her as a burden, as another responsibility on his crowded plate. Instead, he had smiled, kissed her belly, and whispered, "This is perfect. Now we're complete." Tears of relief had filled her eyes. In that moment, she was convinced she had found the love story she always wanted. But cracks soon appeared. Nicholas grew distant, consumed by his company's expansion. He missed doctor appointments, skipped dinners, and brushed off her tears with a casual, "You're just hormonal." Each time, Isabella convinced herself he was simply stressed. She repeated her mother's words like a prayer. Men carry weight on their shoulders. Be patient. Stand by him. So she stood by him, even as doubts gnawed at her heart. When Nicholas proposed with a diamond ring so large it made her classmates gasp, Isabella thought it was proof that her patience had been worth it. A grand wedding was planned. The guest list glittered with CEOs, senators, and socialites. She told herself that once the vows were spoken, once they were husband and wife, the distance would vanish. He would come back to her. They would be a family. She wanted to believe it so badly. And that is why, standing in her wedding gown with her unborn child stirring inside her, Nicholas's whispered betrayal felt like a knife. Because Isabella wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the family she had dreamed of since she was a little girl, watching her mother sew dresses she could never wear. Now all of that was in jeopardy. And the cruelest part? The world thought she was the luckiest woman alive. The Crystal Crown Hotel had never looked more dazzling. Its grand ballroom, a palace of gold and crystal, had been transformed into a cathedral of opulence. White roses cascaded from towering arrangements, chandeliers rained light across marble floors polished to a mirror's sheen, and a live orchestra tuned their instruments with the reverence of a royal procession. The air smelled of champagne and lilies, thick with the perfume of wealth. Guests whispered in admiration as they entered. Senators, tech moguls, film stars, and journalists filled the room, each one aware that tonight wasn't just a wedding, it was a statement. Nicholas Hale, the young CEO who had built an empire in under a decade, was tying the knot. It was the union of business and romance, a fairy tale splashed across every gossip column. They called Isabella Torres lucky. Whispers rippled through the crowd as photographers snapped photos of her gown, a masterpiece of silk and lace designed by one of Europe's most coveted couturiers. The delicate embroidery shimmered like stardust, perfectly hugging her figure while cradling the life growing inside her. Strangers marveled at her radiant glow, never suspecting that beneath her smile, her heart was breaking. Nicholas, meanwhile, thrived in the spotlight. Standing tall in his tailored tuxedo, he shook hands with governors and exchanged laughter with billionaires. His voice carried across the room, smooth and commanding. Every gesture, every smile, was polished to perfection. To the world, he was the perfect groom. To Isabella, he was now a stranger with secrets dripping from his tongue. "Have you ever seen such a perfect couple?" a guest whispered, clutching a flute of champagne. "She's glowing," another said. "Nicholas really hit the jackpot. She looks like a queen." But behind the praise lay whispers Isabella couldn't ignore. "I heard he's been seen with his assistant," someone murmured near the bar. "Too close if you ask me." A laugh followed. "Oh please, all men stray. At least he gave her the wedding of the century." The words stung, though no one dared speak them loud enough for Isabella to hear. Yet she did. Every word, every careless laugh. They confirmed what she had just overheard minutes before. Nicholas didn't love her. This was theater, a performance staged for investors and headlines. Still, Isabella played her role. She descended the staircase into the ballroom, every eye fixed on her, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The orchestra swelled, the guests gasped, and Nicholas extended his hand with a rehearsed charm. Cameras flashed, immortalizing the moment for magazines and business journals. But Isabella's eyes, dark and glistening, betrayed the storm within. As she reached Nicholas, he leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "Smile wider," he hissed softly, his grip tightening around her hand. "We have too many important people watching." Her breath caught. For a moment she wanted to scream, to pull away, to let the entire ballroom know the truth of who this man was. But she couldn't. Not yet. The world saw perfection, and she was trapped inside it. The officiant cleared his throat, calling the room to order. Guests silenced, phones ready to capture history. The ceremony was about to begin, and as Isabella stood at the altar, her heart pounding, she realized something chilling. The fairy tale wasn't hers. It was Nicholas's, and she was merely a prop in his empire's performance. The ballroom hushed as the officiant began speaking, his voice echoing beneath the crystal chandeliers. Isabella stood before Nicholas, her hands trembling inside his grip, her heart pounding with every word. To the crowd, it was a vision of love, a glowing bride and a powerful groom pledging their lives together. But beneath the polished surface, something darker pulsed. Nicholas Hale didn't look at Isabella. From the moment the vows began, his eyes wandered. They scanned the crowd with restless calculation, pausing briefly on every senator, every billionaire, every journalist who might one day hold his fate in their hands. To the guests, it looked like confidence. To Isabella, it felt like neglect. She followed his gaze once, twice, until she saw where it finally lingered. Sabrina Cross. Sitting just 3 rows back, the young woman was stunning in a crimson gown that hugged her curves like a secret whispered too close. Her lips curved into a smile as Nicholas's eyes found hers. It was a smile only lovers understood. Isabella's stomach turned, the baby shifting inside her as if reacting to the betrayal radiating in the air. Nicholas's jaw twitched, the corner of his mouth threatening to curl upward, but he quickly smoothed it into a mask of solemnity. He returned his gaze to the officiant, but the damage was done. Isabella had seen it, a secret exchange in front of hundreds of witnesses, invisible to all but her. "Do you, Nicholas Hale, take Isabella Torres to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant asked. The room held its breath. Nicholas squeezed Isabella's hand just a little too tight. "I do," he said smoothly. The words were flawless, but his tone carried no warmth. It was a transaction, a performance rehearsed for cameras and investors. When the question turned to Isabella, her throat tightened. She wanted to say no. She wanted to rip the veil from her head and expose him for the liar he was. But the weight of 100 eyes pressed down on her. Her parents were in the front row, her mother clutching tissues, already teary-eyed with pride. The press leaned forward, pens poised. Isabella's voice cracked as she whispered, "I do." Applause erupted. Guests rose to their feet, showering the couple with admiration. To the world, it was perfection. To Isabella, it was the sound of chains locking shut. Nicholas leaned in for the kiss, but even that was wrong. His lips brushed hers with a cold efficiency, nothing like the tenderness he once showed. And when he pulled away, Isabella caught it again. The flicker of his eyes, darting back to Sabrina. It wasn't love. It was possession. The orchestra swelled, cameras flashed, and Nicholas raised their joined hands triumphantly, as though he had just won a prize. Isabella forced herself to wave, her smile brittle, her heart shattering behind it. She knew now what the whispers in the corridor meant, what the rumors hinted at, what the look in his eyes confirmed. Nicholas didn't marry her out of love. He married her for an image, for power, for control. And as the crowd erupted into celebration, Isabella felt the truth pressing against her chest like a scream. The man she had just vowed her life to was already lost to another woman. The ceremony was over, but the night was only beginning. The ballroom of the Crystal Crown Hotel had transformed into a glittering feast of laughter, music, and champagne. Waiters glided between tables carrying silver trays topped with caviar, crystal flutes sparkled under the chandeliers, and the orchestra shifted from solemn wedding marches to lively waltzes. To the guests, it was the perfect celebration. To Isabella Torres, it was a stage where she had to keep smiling while her heart bled beneath the gown. Nicholas Hale was in his element. He moved through the room like a king greeting his court, shaking hands with investors, laughing with senators, whispering to journalists who scribbled notes about his meteoric rise. Everywhere he went, applause seemed to follow. People toasted to his brilliance, his charm, his future. Isabella watched him from across the hall, clutching her champagne flute with trembling fingers. She wondered if anyone else noticed the distance in his eyes, or if she was the only one cursed with the truth. Her phone buzzed. Isabella slipped it from her clutch, grateful for a distraction. But when she glanced at the screen, her blood froze. It wasn't her phone that buzzed. It was Nicholas's. He had left it on the sweetheart table while he charmed a governor near the dance floor. The screen lit up, flashing a single message. From Sabrina. Her hand shook as she read the preview. Counting the minutes until you're mine tonight. Can't wait to feel your hands again. The air drained from her lungs. She glanced around, praying no one had seen her pick up the phone. Her heart thundered in her chest as she unlocked it. The passcode was still their anniversary date, the one she thought meant something to him. More messages filled the screen. Dozens of them. Don't forget, champagne at the penthouse after midnight. You looked incredible on stage. I love when you steal glances at me. She has no idea, does she? Isabella's vision blurred. Her hands pressed protectively against her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the poison dripping from the words. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time slip. It was an affair. Long, deliberate, cruel. A laugh from across the room made her look up. Sabrina was there, draped in crimson, her hand casually resting on a champagne flute as she leaned into a circle of society women. Their laughter was light, but their eyes flicked toward Isabella with a glimmer of pity, even amusement. Did they know? Did everyone know? Her pulse pounded in her ears. The room spun. The chandeliers glittered like knives above her. The music swelled like a cruel joke. She wanted to scream, to hurl the phone at Nicholas's smug face, to expose every filthy word on the screen. But she froze. Cameras were everywhere. Every guest, every journalist, every whispering gossip blogger, it would all be immortalized. Nicholas returned, sliding his arm around her waist with a smile for the crowd. His grip was firm, almost possessive, as if reminding her that she was his trophy. Smile, he murmured, his teeth gleaming for the cameras. We're the perfect couple. Isabella forced her lips to curl upward, the phone burning like fire in her hand. Inside, her soul was screaming. Outside, she was still the glowing bride. But as the orchestra swelled and Nicholas lifted his glass in a triumphant toast, Isabella's eyes locked on Sabrina across the room. The mistress raised her flute with a knowing smirk. And in that moment, Isabella realized the nightmare wasn't hidden anymore. It was unfolding in plain sight, and she was the only one trapped inside it. The applause, the music, the glittering chandeliers, everything blurred into white noise as Isabella slipped away from the ballroom. She muttered something about needing fresh air, but no one paid attention. Nicholas was too busy charming his investors, and the guests were too dazzled by champagne and gossip to notice the bride's sudden disappearance. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she fled down a hallway, clutching her gown in trembling fists. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her chest tightened, her breath came in shallow bursts, and by the time she found a side chamber near the restrooms, she felt like she was suffocating. She shoved the door shut, locked it, and collapsed onto the velvet chaise inside. The silence hit her like a wave. For the first time that day, there were no cameras, no flashing lights, no forced smiles. Just Isabella, her swollen belly, and the crushing weight of betrayal. She buried her face in her hands, the tears pouring out in hot, uncontrollable streams. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice cracking in the empty room. "To us? To our baby?" Her hands pressed against her stomach as though she could shield the little life inside from the truth. She wanted to be strong, but in that moment she felt weaker than she ever had. Every memory of Nicholas, the first kiss, the whispered promises, the proposal, unraveled like threads of a cheap costume. Nothing was real. Nothing but the ache in her chest and the child depending on her to survive. She remembered the words she had overheard earlier, Nicholas's silky voice promising Sabrina he would sneak away after the vows. She replayed the text messages, each one a blade. She has no idea, does she? The cruelty was unbearable. Isabella clutched a handkerchief from her clutch and tried to wipe away the mascara streaking her cheeks. But her reflection in the gilded mirror across the room betrayed her. A bride in a gown worth more than her childhood home, sitting broken, mascara running, lips trembling. She looked less like a queen and more like a ghost. A knock rattled the door. "Mrs. Hale?" It was one of the wedding coordinators, her voice chipper and oblivious. "The photographer is ready for your couple portraits." Isabella choked on a bitter laugh. Couple portraits? A fairy tale album for a fairy tale that never existed. She stayed silent, praying the woman would go away. After a moment, footsteps retreated. Her phone buzzed again, With trembling hands, she checked it, half hoping it was a message of comfort from a friend. Instead, it was Nicholas. "Where are you? Don't make a scene. Get back here. Investors are asking for you." The words stabbed deeper than the affair itself. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I love you." Just orders, just control. Her sobs grew harsher. She curled up on the chaise, gown spilling like a broken wave around her, rocking slightly as though to cradle herself. The world expected a glowing bride, a radiant wife, but behind the locked door she was just a young woman, pregnant, humiliated, and utterly alone. For a moment, the thought crossed her mind to run, to grab her bag, slip out the back, and vanish before anyone noticed. But where would she go? Back to her parents, who had already praised Nicholas as their family's savior? Back to the small apartment she had left behind for this gilded cage? She was trapped. And as the muffled laughter from the ballroom filtered under the door, Isabella pressed her forehead against the cool marble wall and whispered, "God, don't let me break completely. Not here. Not tonight." Isabella eventually forced herself to stand, dabbing at her ruined makeup with shaking hands. She couldn't hide in that locked room forever. Her absence would raise questions, and Nicholas would not tolerate even the smallest flaw in his perfect performance. Taking a trembling breath, she slipped out into the corridor, her heels tapping softly against the marble tiles. The hallway was dim compared to the ballroom's glittering glow, and for a moment, she felt invisible. But as she moved closer to the sound of music and laughter, voices drifted toward her, sharp, hushed whispers from two women lingering near the powder room. "Can you believe she doesn't know?" one voice said, tinged with cruel amusement. "She must know," the other replied. "Everyone's been talking about Nicholas and Sabrina for months. It's practically an open secret." Isabella froze mid-step, her breath caught in her throat. The first woman chuckled. "He flaunts it. The way he looks at Sabrina, it's shameless. Half the room saw him wink at her during the vows. Did you catch it?" "I did. Poor Isabella. She looks so proud, so happy. I almost pity her." "Almost," the first voice sneered. "But honestly, she's naive. Did she really think a man like Nicholas would stay faithful to a girl like her? She's sweet, sure, but she's no Sabrina." Their laughter, low and cruel, echoed down the corridor. Isabella's hand flew to her chest. Her heart hammered violently as nausea coiled in her stomach. The humiliation was no longer just private, it was public. She wasn't only betrayed, she was mocked, pitied, the subject of gossip among the glittering elite. Her knees wobbled. She leaned against the wall, clutching at the silk of her gown. Their words sliced deeper than the texts, deeper than Nicholas's cold kiss. Because now she knew. Everyone else had seen it. Everyone else had known, and she was the fool in the white dress. The women's voices grew softer as they walked away, still giggling, still entertained by her tragedy. Isabella remained frozen in place, her body trembling as hot tears streaked her cheeks again. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering through sobs, "I'm so sorry, baby. I should have protected us. I should have seen it." A group of men passed by, their laughter booming. She caught fragments of their conversation too. Lucky guy. Two women in love with him at the same time. Not for long. Everyone knows Sabrina will replace her soon enough. Isabella's just the warm-up act. The cruelty of it all struck Isabella like a physical blow. She wasn't just betrayed, she was entertainment. Her heartbreak was their gossip, her humiliation their casual amusement. She stumbled into a side alcove, pressing her forehead against the cool stone column to steady herself. The orchestra's waltz carried on. The party roared with joy, and yet here she stood, stripped of dignity, aching and alone. In that moment, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if they're right? What if Nicholas never loved me at all? What if I was always just a placeholder until Sabrina was ready to take my place? The realization twisted inside her like a knife. She had traded her dreams, her independence, her peace for the illusion of love, and now she was the punchline of a cruel joke whispered under chandeliers. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Nicholas. "Where the hell are you? Investors are asking. Get back here now." Isabella wiped her tears, her hands trembling. She knew she had to return, but as she straightened her gown and stepped back toward the glittering hall, a fire sparked in her chest. The whispers had broken her, yes, but they had also opened her eyes. And for the first time she thought, maybe this fairy tale wasn't going to end the way Nicholas expected. Isabella steadied herself as she re-entered the ballroom, the dazzling lights burning her tear-streaked eyes. She forced her lips into a practiced smile, though her chest still trembled from the whispers she had overheard in the hallway. The orchestra played a cheerful tune, couples spun across the dance floor, and the smell of champagne lingered like a cruel reminder that everyone else was celebrating while her world crumbled. Nicholas spotted her immediately. His jaw tightened. With swift, commanding strides, he crossed the room, his hand gripping her elbow like a vice. To the guests, it looked like a tender gesture. To Isabella, it was a warning. "You disappeared," he muttered under his breath, his smile frozen for the cameras. "Don't embarrass me tonight. Investors are watching." She swallowed hard, nodding as if obedient, though her insides screamed. Nicholas released her arm and turned back to his circle of admirers, leaving Isabella to stand in the shadow of his success, a doll in a glass case. That was when she felt a gaze on her. Across the room, a man watched her intently, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a midnight suit, with steel-gray eyes that didn't waver. Damian Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises, Nicholas's fiercest rival. His presence at the wedding had raised eyebrows among the elite. Why would Nicholas invite a competitor? But Nicholas loved to flaunt his power, to prove that even enemies bowed to him. Damian did not bow. Their eyes met for a moment too long. Isabella looked away quickly, her cheeks flushing, but Damian had already seen it. The tremor in her hand, the redness around her eyes, the cracks in the facade Nicholas had so carefully built. He began moving through the crowd, excusing himself from a cluster of board members, his gaze never leaving her. "Mrs. Hale," he greeted softly when he reached her side. His voice was smooth but carried an edge of curiosity, almost concern. Isabella stiffened at the title. "Please, it's Isabella." Damian studied her face, his expression unreadable, yet oddly gentle. "Forgive me, Isabella, but I can't help noticing. You don't look like a woman celebrating the happiest day of her life." Her throat tightened. No one had dared to say it aloud, not even her closest friends who smiled blindly through Nicholas's charm. And now here was the one man her husband despised most, speaking the truth she couldn't voice. "I'm fine," she whispered quickly, forcing another brittle smile. "It's just been a long day." Damian's eyes narrowed slightly, as though he could see right through her lie. Before he could press further, Nicholas's laughter boomed nearby. Sabrina was at his side, her crimson dress catching the light as she leaned close to whisper something in his ear. He grinned, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent to the way Isabella's heart clenched. Damian followed Isabella's gaze. He saw it. The glance too intimate, the smirk too familiar. His jaw set. "So the rumors are true," he murmured under his breath. Isabella flinched. "You've heard them too?" "Everyone has," Damian admitted, his voice low, meant only for her. "But seeing it here, like this, it's cruel." Her chest burned with humiliation. If even Damian Reed knew, then her shame was bigger than she feared. Tears threatened again, but she held them back. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Damian's gaze softened for the first time. "Because you deserve better than to be the last one to know." For a moment, the noise of the ballroom faded. It was just the two of them, standing on the edge of a storm. Isabella's heart raced, not with attraction, but with the strange relief of being seen. For the first time that night, someone wasn't blind to her pain. Nicholas's voice thundered again, calling for a toast. Glasses clinked, laughter rose, and the performance continued. But Isabella knew something had shifted, because Damian Reed had noticed, and men like Damian never noticed without reason. The ballroom sparkled with laughter and champagne as the evening rolled on. Guests mingled under the chandeliers, trading gossip and snapping photos for the society pages. To the world, it was still the wedding of the year. To Isabella, it was a gilded cage. Every step she took, every smile she forced, felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. Nicholas was in his element. He held court near the head table, flanked by senators and business moguls, his arm casually resting on the back of Isabella's chair as though she were a prized possession, not a living, breathing woman. He flashed that practiced grin, the one that made reporters swoon, investors swoon, even enemies grudgingly respect him. But every time Isabella followed the line of his gaze, it ended at Sabrina Cross. The woman in crimson. Sabrina glided through the crowd with the grace of someone who knew she was being watched. Her gown clung to her like a second skin, every movement designed to draw attention. She laughed a little too loudly, leaned a little too close to powerful men, and each time Nicholas's eyes found her, she smiled as if the room existed only for the two of them. The final straw came during the first dance. Nicholas led Isabella onto the floor as the orchestra began a sweeping waltz. Cameras flashed, guests sighed at the sight of the glowing bride and her handsome groom gliding across the marble. But halfway through the dance, Isabella caught it. Sabrina, standing at the edge of the dance floor, raising her glass in a silent toast, her eyes locked on Nicholas. And Nicholas smirked. The smirk was fleeting, gone before the cameras could catch it, but it was there. A message meant only for Sabrina. Isabella's chest tightened, her steps faltering. Nicholas leaned close, whispering through clenched teeth, "Keep smiling. Don't ruin this for me." When the dance ended, Isabella barely had time to catch her breath before Sabrina struck. The mistress approached their table, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. Guests turned, curious, some whispering, others grinning knowingly. Sabrina carried herself with the confidence of a woman who knew she had nothing to fear. She placed her champagne flute down on the table, on Isabella's side of the table. "Congratulations," Sabrina purred, her voice dripping with honey but her eyes sharp as glass. "You both look radiant." Isabella froze, the words slicing her like a blade. Nicholas shifted uncomfortably, but before he could speak, Sabrina leaned closer to him, her crimson lips curling into a smirk. "Don't you agree, Nicholas? Tonight is unforgettable." The implication hung in the air. Guests glanced at one another, whispers rising like smoke. Isabella's cheeks burned as she realized what Sabrina was doing. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was possession. A public declaration without saying the words outright. Nicholas forced a laugh, raising his glass. "Indeed, to my beautiful bride." His words were smooth, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking to Sabrina for just a fraction of a second too long. Isabella's stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to stand and throw the glass in Sabrina's smug face. But she couldn't. Not here. Not with every journalist ready to twist her pain into headlines. So she sat, silent, her knuckles white as she gripped her napkin beneath the table. Sabrina, satisfied, lingered for another moment before drifting back into the crowd, leaving behind a trail of whispers. "Did you see that?" one woman murmured. "She's daring, bold. I almost admire her nerve." Poor Isabella, she must know now, everyone does. Isabella's chest constricted. The humiliation was no longer whispered in corners, it was unfolding in plain sight, and the entire ballroom was complicit. She lifted her glass to her lips, forcing herself to swallow champagne she couldn't taste. Her eyes blurred with tears she couldn't let fall. Across the room, Sabrina laughed again, her voice like shards of crystal, and for the first time, Isabella realized the mistress wasn't hiding anymore. She was declaring war. The night was unraveling faster than Isabella could contain it. What had begun as a glittering fairy tale now felt like a nightmare staged for an audience of 100. Sabrina's bold intrusion still lingered in the air, like the echo of a slap, and Isabella could feel eyes burning into her back from every corner of the ballroom. She clutched her champagne flute with trembling fingers, her lips frozen into a brittle smile as Nicholas basked in yet another round of laughter with his investors. But then it began. The whispers, subtle at first, carried on the edges of conversations, but sharp enough to pierce her like shards of glass. "Do you think the baby's really his?" A woman at the next table murmured, her jeweled fingers tapping the rim of her glass. "I heard rumors," another replied, her voice hushed yet cutting. "She was seen with an old friend before the engagement. A professor, I think." A man chuckled. "Wouldn't that be something? Nicholas raising another man's child. No wonder he looks elsewhere." Isabella's chest tightened, the words sinking into her skin like poison. She wanted to shout that it wasn't true, that the child she carried was Nicholas's, that she had been faithful even when her heart was ignored. But her voice caught in her throat, strangled by humiliation. Across the room, Sabrina's laughter rang out again. The timing was cruel, deliberate, as if she had planted the seed of the rumor herself. Isabella's stomach churned. It wasn't enough for Sabrina to steal Nicholas's heart, she wanted to steal Isabella's dignity too. The whispers spread like wildfire. Everywhere she turned, eyes lingered too long on her rounded belly, glances exchanged with raised brows and knowing smirks. The cruelty was quiet but deafening. Poor Nicholas, someone sighed. He deserves better. Better? He already has better, another whispered with a smirk. Look at Sabrina. Isabella's hand drifted to her stomach, protectively cradling the life inside her. The baby shifted, a faint kick against her palm, and her eyes filled with tears she fought to keep from spilling. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for her child's honor. And yet in that room, under the glittering chandeliers, she was defenseless. Nicholas finally returned to her side, his hand gripping her shoulder in a gesture that looked tender but felt like restraint. Smile? He hissed again through clenched teeth, his lips never breaking from their public grin. People are watching. She turned to him, her voice barely audible. Do you hear them? Hear what? He muttered, his eyes scanning the crowd for the next powerful handshake. They're saying our baby isn't yours. Nicholas's smile faltered for the briefest second before snapping back into place. He leaned down, his breath hot against her ear. Ignore it. They'll believe what I tell them to believe. That's how power works. The arrogance in his tone was more suffocating than the rumors themselves. He didn't care about her pain, her humiliation, or even the dignity of their unborn child. He cared only about control. Isabella's heart cracked deeper. She realized that she wasn't just married to a man who didn't love her. She was bound to a man who would let her drown to protect his image. The orchestra struck up another tune, the dance floor filling again with glittering gowns and tuxedos. But Isabella remained seated, her hands trembling, her vision blurred. She felt like a statue among the living, a silent exhibit of betrayal on display for the wealthy to mock. And in that moment, with the whispers swirling around her like daggers, Isabella knew. This was no longer about saving her marriage. This was about survival. The night air in the Crystal Crown ballroom felt suffocating, heavy with whispers that clung to Isabella like smoke. She excused herself from Nicholas's side, desperate for a moment to breathe. Her steps led her to a smaller lounge just beyond the banquet hall, a dimly lit retreat where family members had gathered between courses. Her mother was there, perched stiffly on a velvet chair, her pearls gleaming against her aging neck. Her father stood nearby, nervously twisting his wedding band, his eyes darting toward the door as though guarding some secret. When Isabella entered, both of them looked up, their smiles strained. "Darling," her mother said quickly, rising to take her hands. "Where have you been? People are asking questions." Isabella's voice cracked. "Mother, you've heard them, haven't you? The whispers. They're saying Nicholas and Sabrina." Her mother cut her off with a sharp squeeze of her hands. "Lower your voice. This isn't the time or place." Tears burned Isabella's eyes. "Not the time? He's humiliating me in front of everyone. He's with her, mother. He was on the phone with her before the ceremony. I saw the texts with my own eyes. How can I walk back out there and pretend everything is fine?" Her father finally spoke, his tone weary. "Because it has to be fine, Isabella. Do you understand? This marriage is bigger than you. Nicholas he's our son-in-law now, the CEO of Hale Properties. Do you realize what that means for our family? For our future?" Isabella stared at him, her mouth dry. "Our future? What about mine? What about the babies? Don't you care that he's betraying me?" Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course we care, but you must be practical. Men like Nicholas, they stray. That's the truth of powerful men. But he married you. You're the wife. That's what matters." The words struck her like a slap. She pulled her hands free, her voice rising. "You're telling me to accept this? To live with this humiliation for the sake of appearances?" Her father stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We borrowed money from Nicholas, Isabella. To keep your uncle's business afloat, to pay the medical bills when your mother was sick. We can't afford to anger him. Do you want to ruin us all?" Her chest constricted. Suddenly it was clear. This wasn't just about love or betrayal. It was about leverage. Her family had tethered themselves to Nicholas's power, and now her silence was their insurance policy. "I am your daughter," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling. "Your blood. And you're asking me to sacrifice myself for his image?" Her mother's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, but the steel returned quickly. "We're asking you to be strong. To do what women in your position have always done. Endure. Smile. Protect what you've built together. Isabella staggered back, her body shaking. She pressed a hand to her belly, as if shielding her child from the weight of their words. Protect what he built, you mean? Not me, never me. Silence thickened the room. Her parents looked at her with pleading eyes, not out of love, but out of desperation. She realized then that she was alone, truly alone. Not even her family would stand with her. Her father broke the silence, his voice low and final. Go back out there, Isabella. Sit by his side, and do not make a scene. If you love us, if you love this family, you'll keep quiet. The words cut deeper than any rumor, any smirk from Sabrina, any order from Nicholas. Because this time, the betrayal came from blood. And as Isabella turned away, her tears falling silently, she realized, sometimes strangers wound you with lies, but family wounds you with silence. Isabella left the lounge with her heart heavier than before. The betrayal of her husband was unbearable, but the betrayal of her own family, the very people she thought would shield her, carved a deeper wound. Their words echoed in her mind as she drifted back into the chaos of the ballroom. Smile. Endure. Protect what he built. The chandeliers above seemed to mock her, their brilliance illuminating her shame for all to see. She slipped into a shadowed corner near the bar, trying to disappear into the noise. Her fingers twisted the hem of her gown as she fought back tears. She felt invisible, yet utterly exposed. That's when a voice cut through. You look like someone standing in the middle of a fire, the man said. Isabella turned, startled. Damian Reed stood just a few feet away, his expression steady, his gray eyes sharper than the crystal glass in his hand. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way no one else dared tonight. Not with pity, not with curiosity, but with recognition. Isabella faltered, her throat thick with unshed tears. I'm fine. Damian tilted his head, unconvinced. No, you're not. And you don't have to lie to me. Everyone else may be playing pretend tonight, but I've built an empire watching people lie. I can see through it. His words landed heavily. For a moment, Isabella wanted to crumble, to confess everything, but fear clamped down on her chest. You shouldn't be talking to me. Nicholas would explode? Damian finished for her. His lips curled into the faintest smirk. Let him. I'm not afraid of Nicholas Hale. The conviction in his voice sent a shiver through her. She searched his face, trying to understand his intent. Why? Why are you even here? You hate him. Damian's gaze softened. Hating him is easy. But tonight isn't about him. Tonight I see a woman drowning while everyone else pretends she's floating. And I don't like drowning. Her lips trembled. If you've heard the rumors. I have, Damian admitted without hesitation. And I saw it myself. The way he looks at her, the way she flaunts it, he's not even trying to hide it anymore. The bluntness stung, but it was strangely comforting too. At least here with Damian, she wasn't crazy. She wasn't paranoid. She wasn't blind. I don't know what to do, she confessed, her voice breaking. My family, they told me to stay quiet, to smile, to protect him because they owe him. Everyone out there already thinks I'm a fool. And the baby. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly. I can't let this child grow up in lies. For the first time all night, someone didn't silence her. Damian let her speak, let her pour out the pain until her shoulders sagged under its weight. Then carefully he leaned closer, his voice low but firm. Listen to me, Isabella. Nicholas Hale built his empire on control. Control over investors, over the press, over you. But what he fears most isn't losing money or contracts. It's losing the story. If you take back the story, you take back the power. His words struck her like a spark in the darkness. Take back the story. Isabella stared at him, her chest rising and falling, her heart torn between despair and a strange, budding strength. Damian set his glass down and straightened. You're stronger than you think. You just don't believe it yet. But I do. For the first time that night, Isabella didn't feel completely alone. And as Damian's words settled deep in her heart, she realized, maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time to fight. For a fleeting moment, Damian's words had given Isabella something she hadn't felt all night. Hope. But hope was fragile, and it shattered quickly under the weight of cruelty. She had just returned to her table, her pulse still steadying, when she noticed a subtle shift in the energy of the ballroom. Whispers grew louder, sharper. Groups of guests leaned in closer, their eyes darting toward her swollen belly before flicking away with smirks or pity. Something new had entered the current of gossip. Then Isabella saw the source. Sabrina Cross stood near the champagne fountain, crimson gown gleaming under the chandeliers, her smile radiant as she spoke to a cluster of women. Their hands flew to their mouths, gasps muffled, eyes widening in mock shock, before turning toward Isabella with barely concealed delight. The poison was spreading. Within minutes it reached her ears. "I heard the child isn't even Nicholas's." "Really? Whose then?" "Some professor she used to know. Apparently they were close before Nicholas swooped in." "Ah, so that's why Nicholas keeps her around, out of pity." Laughter followed, cold, cruel. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her vision swimming. It wasn't enough that Sabrina had Nicholas's attention. Now she wanted to strip Isabella of her dignity as a mother, to taint the one pure thing she still held on to, her child. Nicholas returned just as the whispers reached a fever pitch. He leaned down, his lips curling into a smile for the cameras, but his voice was sharp against her ear. "What did you do?" Her head snapped toward him. "Me?" she whispered fiercely. "They're saying the baby isn't yours." His eyes darkened, his jaw tight. "Then maybe you shouldn't look so guilty." The words hit her like a fist. She recoiled, stunned. "You think I—" Nicholas didn't answer. He simply turned, lifting his glass to toast another senator, his mask firmly in place. But Isabella saw it, the doubt. The seed Sabrina had planted was working, twisting even Nicholas's thoughts against her. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she rose from the table, her legs trembling beneath the heavy gown, and made her way toward the corridor. Conversations paused as she passed, eyes following her, whispers chasing her like shadows. Near the entrance, she caught Sabrina's gaze. The mistress raised her glass in a mock salute, her smile cruel, triumphant. It was a declaration. "I control the narrative now." Isabella's chest tightened. For a moment, she wanted to scream across the ballroom, to drag Nicholas's phone out and read every vile message aloud. But she froze, the weight of her parents' words crushing her again. Smile. Endure. Protect what he built. She reached the hallway, her hands shaking, her body trembling with rage and despair. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching her belly, whispering through gritted teeth. "It's not true. You are his. You are mine. And no one can take that away." But even as she said it, doubt clawed at her. Not doubt about the child's paternity. She knew the truth. Doubt about whether she had the strength to fight the venom Sabrina had unleashed. The orchestra swelled behind her, the laughter roared, and somewhere in the chaos, Sabrina's voice rang out again, sharp and sweet. "Poor Nicholas, he deserves the truth." And with that, Isabella realized, this was no longer just betrayal. It was war. The night had already stripped Isabella raw. Betrayal, gossip, humiliation. But Sabrina's cruel lie about her child gnawed at her most fiercely. It wasn't just about Nicholas anymore. It was about her baby's dignity, about truth. She slipped away from the ballroom once more, her steps quiet, her gown whispering against the marble floors. This time, she didn't head to the lounge or the powder room. She went to the private bridal suite Nicholas had insisted they use during the wedding. "For convenience," he had said with a smirk, "a place to catch our breath between performances." When Isabella entered, the room was empty. A half-drunk glass of whiskey sat on the side table, Nicholas's cologne lingering in the air, and there on the desk lay his laptop, sleek, black, and still open. Her pulse quickened. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But something deeper, something primal, urged her forward. She sat down, her trembling hands brushing over the keyboard. The screen glowed with an open folder labeled Documents. Wedding. Curiosity overcame fear. She clicked. What she found nearly stole the breath from her lungs. Contracts, spreadsheets, emails. Nothing about vows, love, or family. Instead, page after page revealed calculated strategies. Nicholas had crafted the wedding not as a union, but as a business move. Notes detailed which investors would be attending, which partnerships would strengthen once he appeared as a family man, and how the optics of marrying a modest, respectable woman like Isabella would soften his ruthless public image. Her hands shook as she scrolled further. Then she saw it. A file labeled Contingency Plan, Annulment. Her stomach dropped. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The document spelled out, in cold legal language, how Nicholas had already consulted lawyers about dissolving the marriage quietly after securing his upcoming real estate deal. Isabella would be given a modest settlement, silenced with non-disclosure clauses, and cast aside. And the final blow, an email draft to Sabrina. Once the contracts are signed and the investors are satisfied, I'll make everything official with you. Be patient. This charade won't last long. Tears blurred Isabella's vision, but fury surged hotter than grief. It had all been a lie. Every smile, every promise, even the vows. He hadn't just betrayed her heart, he had orchestrated her humiliation as part of a business plan. For a moment, despair threatened to crush her. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering, "We were never part of his dream. We were just part of his performance." But then, as her eyes lingered on the screen, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just betrayal. It was evidence. Proof. For the first time, she held something Nicholas couldn't control. The ballroom's music thudded faintly through the walls, a reminder that the charade continued just beyond the door. But Isabella no longer felt like a helpless prop in Nicholas's empire. She felt the first spark of power. Her reflection in the dark laptop screen looked different now, not just a broken bride, but a woman holding a weapon. She closed the laptop, her breath steadying. For the first time that night, her tears stopped. And as she stood, smoothing her gown, Isabella whispered, "He thought I was powerless. But he has no idea what I can do with the truth." The glow of Nicholas's laptop screen still haunted Isabella's vision as she stepped away from the bridal suite. The evidence was burned into her mind. Contracts, strategies, and that cold, calculated plan to discard her once she had served her purpose. She had walked into this marriage believing it was love, but tonight she discovered it was nothing more than theater. A show for investors, a mask for a man who cared only for power. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed so heavily on her chest she thought she might collapse. She staggered to the mirror hanging above the vanity, catching sight of her own reflection. The woman staring back was not the radiant bride guests saw downstairs. This woman's makeup was streaked, her eyes red, her smile gone. She looked broken. But then Isabella saw something else in her reflection. Fire. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving dark smudges across her cheeks. Her chest rose and fell with new determination. Enough. Enough of pretending. Enough of playing the obedient bride, the smiling prop in Nicholas's empire. He thought he controlled her. He thought she was weak. But now she had something he feared. Proof. Her fingers touched her stomach, feeling the gentle flutter of life inside. "For you," she whispered to her unborn child, "I will not let him win. I will not let you grow up in his lies." She turned back to the vanity. Her hair was falling loose from its pins, her lipstick faded, but beneath the surface, she saw strength. She wasn't the naive girl Nicholas had charmed at an art show. She wasn't the timid woman who accepted his excuses for late nights and cold words. She was a mother now, and mothers fought with a ferocity men like Nicholas could never understand. Isabella reached for her clutch and pulled out the compact her mother had given her earlier. Her mother's words, "Smile, endure, protect what he built," echoed in her ears, but now they fueled her rage. She reapplied her lipstick, steadying her hand, transforming her trembling lips into a bold red slash. Her tears dried, her back straightened. The gown that once felt like a cage now felt like armor. The orchestra's music drifted faintly through the door. The world outside still believed in the fairy tale, and Nicholas still believed he was in control. But he was wrong. Isabella opened the laptop once more, quickly snapping photos of the incriminating files with her phone. Each click of the camera was like a heartbeat, steady and powerful. She tucked the phone back into her clutch, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile, not of joy, but of resolve. Tonight, she would not expose him. Not yet. Timing mattered. She would let the performance continue. Let Nicholas bask in his illusion of power. Because when she struck, it would be in front of the same audience he had used to humiliate her. She stepped out of the suite, the hallway lights casting her in a new glow. Guests passing by glanced at her, expecting to see the same fragile bride. Instead, they saw a woman with her chin lifted, her steps firm, her eyes sharp. Nicholas had wanted a prop, a pawn in his game, but Isabella Torres was no pawn. And as she descended the staircase back into the glittering chaos of the ballroom, one thought pulsed through her veins. The show wasn't over, but soon it would be hers. The ballroom glittered as if nothing were amiss. Guests laughed over champagne, the orchestra played a triumphant waltz, and Nicholas Hale stood at the center of it all, basking in admiration like a king at his coronation. Sabrina lingered at the edge of the crowd, her crimson gown shimmering, her smirk a secret victory. But when Isabella re-entered the room, something shifted. Heads turned. The fragile bride who had fled in tears was gone. In her place stood a woman with fire in her eyes and resolve in her step. Her gown flowed like armor, her chin lifted, her gaze unflinching. For the first time all night, whispers quieted not from scandal, but from awe. Nicholas noticed immediately. He forced a grin, his arm snaking around her waist as if to remind her of her role. "There you are," he murmured through clenched teeth. "I told you, no more disappearing." Isabella met his eyes, her voice calm, almost too calm. "Don't worry, I'm not disappearing anymore." Before Nicholas could respond, the master of ceremonies clinked a glass, calling the room to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, our groom would like to propose a toast to his beautiful bride." Applause erupted. Nicholas stepped forward, his glass raised high, his smile wide and false. "To Isabella," he declared, "the woman who makes me whole, the reason for tonight's joy, may our love inspire you all." Guests cheered. Cameras flashed. Nicholas turned to kiss Isabella's cheek, but she moved first. She stepped away from him, her own glass lifted, her voice slicing through the applause. "And I," she said, her tone steady, "would like to say something too." The room fell silent. Isabella's gaze swept the crowd. Investors, senators, journalists, strangers who thought they knew her story. She felt her pulse in her throat, but her voice didn't waver. "Tonight, you've all witnessed a fairy tale. A young bride, a powerful groom, a union blessed by family and fortune. But fairy tales are not always what they seem." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Nicholas's smile faltered. He reached for her arm, but Isabella pulled back, her voice rising stronger. "Because while you toasted our future, while you admired our vows, I was hearing my groom, my husband, whisper his love to another woman. Minutes before I walked down the aisle, Nicholas told his mistress he couldn't wait to be with her tonight." Gasps erupted. Heads turned sharply toward Sabrina, whose crimson smile faltered for the first time. Journalists scrambled for their phones, cameras clicking faster. Nicholas's face hardened. "Isabella, enough." But Isabella didn't stop. Her hand dipped into her clutch, pulling out her phone. With a single tap, the ballroom filled with Nicholas's recorded voice, his words echoing like a curse. "This wedding is just for the investors. Be patient, baby. Tonight you're mine." The sound cut through the air, undeniable. The crowd erupted, some gasping, others whispering in shock, still others raising their phones to capture every second. Sabrina's hand flew to her mouth. Nicholas lunged for the phone, but Isabella stepped back, her voice steady. "This is the man you admire. This is the man you invest in. Not a husband, not a father-to-be, just a liar." The orchestra fell silent. The glittering ballroom, moments ago full of triumph, was now steeped in scandal. Nicholas's mask cracked completely, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. "You'll regret this," he hissed under his breath. But Isabella lifted her chin, her voice ringing clear. "No, Nicholas, for the first time tonight, I don't regret a thing." The ballroom exploded in chaos. Gasps overlapped with frantic whispers, cameras flashed like lightning, and the orchestra fell silent mid-note. Nicholas Hale stood frozen at the center of it all, his polished mask cracking before hundreds of eyes. "This is nonsense," Nicholas barked, his voice booming with the authority he had always relied on. He straightened his tuxedo, forcing his smile back into place. A misunderstanding, a recording taken out of context. But the crowd wasn't convinced. Journalists were already typing furiously, investors were exchanging sharp glances, and Sabrina, still in her crimson gown, looked pale beneath the chandeliers. Isabella stood tall, her glass still in hand. For once, she didn't flinch. "Context," she repeated, her voice sharp. "Minutes before our vows, you told her this wedding was for investors. That tonight she was yours. What context could possibly explain that?" Nicholas turned to the crowd, his hands raised as if to calm children. "This is my wedding night. Surely you all know how emotions run high. Isabella is overwhelmed, pregnant, stressed. It's understandable she would misinterpret things. The condescension in his tone was thick, designed to paint her as hysterical, irrational. But before Isabella could respond, another voice cut through the room. I heard it too. Every head turned. A waiter, no older than 20, stood stiffly near the back. His tray shook in his hands, but his voice was clear. I was outside the dressing room. I heard Mr. Hale on the phone. He said exactly what's on that recording. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nicholas's eyes narrowed dangerously. You're mistaken. But then another voice chimed in, this time from a middle-aged woman seated near the front. He wasn't mistaken. I saw you myself. The woman's jeweled necklace glittered as she leaned forward, her face stern. During the ceremony, your eyes weren't on your bride. They were on Sabrina. I whispered to my husband about it. We both noticed. Murmurs grew louder. The tide was turning. Nicholas's composure slipped further, sweat glistening at his temples. He scanned the room, desperate to regain control. These are lies, he snapped. Idle gossip. Isabella is my wife. Sabrina is my employee. That's all. Sabrina flinched at the word employee. Her eyes widened, betrayal flickering across her face. She had expected to be defended, maybe even claimed. Instead, Nicholas tossed her aside like a liability. Another guest, a man from the finance world, raised his voice. If this is all gossip, Nicholas, then why do I recall seeing you and Miss Cross arriving late to a gala last month, in the same car? The murmurs became a roar. Phones rose higher, recording every word, every expression. Nicholas's empire wasn't just being questioned, it was collapsing in real time. Stop this! Nicholas shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. He reached for Isabella, his hand gripping her wrist tightly. You're making a fool of yourself. Sit down and let me fix this. But Isabella wrenched free, her voice strong and clear. The only fool here is the man who thought lies could stay hidden forever. Applause broke out. Not loud, not yet, but enough. A spark. The crowd was no longer on Nicholas's side. The illusion of control he had spent years crafting was crumbling. Nicholas's gaze swept the ballroom, but everywhere he looked, he saw suspicion, judgment, betrayal. His investors no longer smiled. His allies no longer raised glasses. His mistress no longer looked smug. She looked abandoned. And Isabella, the woman he had tried to use as a prop, stood taller than ever before. For the first time in his life, Nicholas Hale realized the truth. His empire wasn't built on power. It was built on perception. And tonight, perception had turned against him. The ballroom was a storm. Guests murmured, journalists typed furiously, and flashes from cameras lit up the golden walls like lightning. Nicholas Hale stood rigid, his mask crumbling, his voice hoarse from shouting denials. But nothing silenced the whispers. The tide had shifted, and the once invincible CEO was drowning in the very crowd that used to worship him. And then Sabrina moved. The mistress in crimson stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Every head turned as she approached, the smirk gone from her lips, her eyes narrowed with something colder. Betrayal. For the first time that night, she no longer looked like the confident seductress. She looked like a woman scorned. "Nicholas," she said, her voice carrying through the hushed ballroom, "don't you dare call me just your employee." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Isabella's chest tightened, her eyes fixed on the woman who had been the source of her humiliation. But now, Sabrina wasn't smirking at her. She was staring daggers at Nicholas. "You promised me," Sabrina continued, her voice trembling with fury. "You told me once the investors signed their contracts, you'd annul the marriage, that I would take her place." She jabbed a manicured finger toward Isabella. "You said this wedding was nothing but theater." The crowd erupted into chaos. Isabella's stomach clenched, but she stood firm, letting Sabrina's words confirm everything she already knew. Nicholas paled, his composure collapsing. "That's not true," he stammered, forcing a laugh. "She's hysterical. She's jealous. She's—" Sabrina cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. "Jealous? Maybe. But hysterical?" She pulled her phone from her clutch, her hand steady. "What do you call this, then?" She tapped her screen, and Nicholas's voice filled the room again, this time from her own collection of recordings. "Be patient, Sabrina. Isabella won't matter once the contracts are done. You're the only one I want." The ballroom froze. Every whisper stopped. Every eye turned to Nicholas, who stood exposed, trembling with fury and fear. Isabella's breath caught. She had her own evidence, but hearing Sabrina wield hers was a shock she hadn't anticipated. Nicholas's empire wasn't just unraveling, it was being ripped apart from every angle. You used me, Sabrina spat, her crimson lips curling with venom. You paraded me around in the shadows, made promises you never intended to keep. Do you know how humiliating it is to be your dirty secret? To watch you smile at her while whispering lies to me? She laughed bitterly, her voice trembling. I thought I was winning, but the truth is, Nicholas, no one wins with you. You use everyone. Gasps filled the room. Investors shook their heads. Journalists scribbled faster. The orchestra sat frozen, bows hovering over strings, waiting for permission to breathe. Nicholas's face twisted in rage. You ungrateful little. But Sabrina didn't let him finish. She turned her gaze back to the crowd, her voice steady. You all should know, this man doesn't love anyone. Not his wife, not his mistress, not even his company. He loves power, and he'll destroy anyone who gets in his way. The ballroom erupted in noise, shouts, questions, camera flashes. Nicholas reached for Sabrina, but she stepped back, her eyes blazing with hatred. And then, for the first time that night, Sabrina turned to Isabella. Their eyes met, and for a brief, fragile moment, there was no rivalry between them. Just two women burned by the same man. Isabella lifted her chin, steady and unbroken. Sabrina gave a small, bitter smile, then turned back to the crowd, leaving Nicholas alone in the center of the storm. And as his empire crumbled, Isabella realized, sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't vengeance, it's the truth, spoken by the last person he expected to betray him. The ballroom was a battlefield now. Isabella's truth had torn open Nicholas's carefully crafted illusion, and Sabrina's fury had driven the dagger deeper. Guests murmured in shock, investors whispered furiously among themselves, and journalists scribbled notes that would destroy reputations by morning. Nicholas, once untouchable, stood trembling, his tuxedo immaculate but his power slipping like sand through his fingers. He raised his hands, trying to reclaim control. Enough, he thundered. This circus has gone too far. You're all feeding on lies, recordings taken out of context, bitter women seeking revenge. Do you really think I'd risk everything I've built for cheap scandals? But then, a new voice cut through the chaos, calm, steady, and deadly. Yes, Damian Reed said. Every head turned. The rival CEO stepped into the center of the ballroom, his presence commanding without effort. Unlike Nicholas, he didn't need to raise his voice. The stillness that followed carried his words farther than any shout. Damian's eyes locked on Nicholas. Because that's what you've always done. Risked everything for your ego, for your hunger. And tonight, it's finally caught up with you. Nicholas sneered, though his face was pale. This isn't your fight, Reed. Damian's lips curved into a cold smile. On the contrary, it's exactly my fight, because I've spent years watching you cheat, manipulate, and deceive not just women, but entire companies. And unlike them, I came prepared. He raised a sleek black folder from under his arm. Cameras flashed as he opened it, revealing a stack of documents. For months, I've been gathering evidence of Hale Properties funneling investor funds into offshore accounts, shell companies registered under false names, embezzlement, Nicholas, fraud, white-collar crime dressed in Tom Ford. The crowd erupted. Investors surged forward, trying to glimpse the papers. Journalists practically lunged with their cameras. Isabella's heart pounded as Damian's words reverberated through the hall. Nicholas's face twisted in panic. Lies, you forged this. But Damian was ready. He held up a USB drive. Every document, every transfer, every email is backed up here. And guess what? It's already with the authorities. Tonight was just the curtain call. The room gasped collectively. The orchestra, frozen all evening, finally lowered their instruments as if recognizing the performance was over. Sabrina laughed bitterly from the sidelines. Looks like you won't be keeping your promises to anyone, Nicholas. Nicholas lunged forward, grabbing at the folder, but Damian stepped back easily, taller, steadier, immovable. Security guards, once stationed for show, moved forward at the investor's commands, no longer protecting Nicholas but circling him like predators waiting for a kill. You think you can ruin me? Nicholas spat, his voice breaking. Do you know who I am? Damian's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp as steel. We all know who you are now, and that's exactly the problem. The whispers turned into roars. Investors demanded answers. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed in blinding bursts. Nicholas stood in the center, sweating, shaking, stripped of every ounce of dignity. And in that chaos, Isabella saw something she had never seen before. Not arrogance, not confidence, not power. Fear. Nicholas Hale, the man who had humiliated her, betrayed her, used her, was finally cornered. Damien turned toward Isabella, his voice lowering but loud enough for all to hear. No one deserves to suffer under men like him. Not wives, not mistresses, not investors. Tonight, his empire ends. The ballroom erupted into applause, some hesitant, some furious, but all united. For the first time, the crowd wasn't cheering Nicholas. They were cheering his downfall. And Isabella, standing tall in her gown, realized the man who thought he owned her had lost everything, and she had survived to see it. The ballroom that once celebrated Nicholas Hale now buzzed with his ruin. Investors shouted, journalists swarmed, and security hovered, waiting for instructions. Nicholas stood in the center like a toppled statue, his once flawless image shattered into dust. His tuxedo was still pristine, but his eyes, wild, desperate, betrayed the truth. The king had fallen. Isabella stood a few feet away, her gown flowing like a river of light, her chin lifted. She should have felt broken after the humiliation, the betrayal, the whispers. But instead, she felt something stronger than she had in months: power. She had survived, she had spoken, and she had won. Nicholas lunged toward her, his voice ragged. "This isn't over, Isabella. You think you've beaten me, but you're nothing without me. You'll crawl back when you realize no one else will have you." For the first time, Isabella didn't flinch. She met his eyes, her voice steady, clear enough to cut through the chaos. "You're wrong, Nicholas. I already have everything I need. My child, my dignity, and a future free of you." Applause erupted, louder this time, genuine. Guests who once gossiped now clapped, some out of respect, others out of sheer relief to see Nicholas fall. Sabrina slipped quietly from the room, her crimson dress trailing behind her, no longer a victor, but just another casualty of Nicholas's lies. Damien Reed stepped closer, his gaze steady on Isabella. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging the strength he had seen in her all along. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head, her hand instinctively brushing her belly. "No," she whispered. "We did it, and he destroyed himself." Within minutes, security escorted Nicholas out. Cameras followed him, capturing every furious shout, every desperate denial. By morning, his face would be plastered across headlines, not as a celebrated CEO, but as a fraud, a liar, a man undone by his own arrogance. The orchestra remained silent, the champagne untouched, the fairy tale wedding turned into a cautionary tale. But Isabella no longer cared. The performance was over, and for the first time, she wasn't an actress in someone else's play. She was the author of her own story. Weeks later, Nicholas Hale's empire collapsed. His investors abandoned him, his board voted him out, and lawsuits piled higher than his skyscrapers. Sabrina vanished into obscurity, her once smug smile erased from society pages. And Isabella? She built something new. With the settlement she secured and the strength she had discovered, she opened her own design studio. Small at first, but full of heart. Her talent, once overlooked in Nicholas's shadow, flourished under her own name. Clients came not because of who she had married, but because of who she was. On the studio wall, framed in simple gold, hung a photo, not of her wedding, but of her holding her newborn daughter. A reminder of the night everything fell apart, and the reason she had chosen to rise. Damien kept his distance at first, respectful, never pushing. But over time, his presence became a quiet constant, checking in, offering help when she needed it, never asking for more than she was ready to give. And one evening, as Isabella rocked her child to sleep, she realized that for the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Nicholas had tried to define her as weak, as replaceable. But in the end, it was his name that became synonymous with ruin. Isabella's became something else entirely: resilience. And as she closed the curtains on another day, her daughter cooing softly in her arms, Isabella whispered with a smile, "We're free now, and this time, no one will ever silence us again." So, that's how the story closes, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me until the very end, aren't you? If you are, it means something in Isabella's journey touched your heart in a way you can't quite ignore. Maybe it's because we've all felt betrayed, abandoned, or underestimated at some point in our lives. But here's the truth. Pain doesn't have to define us. It can refine us. The Stoics taught us, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Seneca. Think about that. So much of the fear that holds us back comes from the stories we tell ourselves. Isabella found her power the moment she stopped believing Nicholas's lies and chose to write her own story. And that's a lesson for all of us. You may not face a ballroom full of whispers, but you might face doubt, gossip, or people who try to control your narrative. Don't let them. As Marcus Aurelius said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. If Isabella's strength inspired you tonight, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs courage, and don't forget to subscribe. We have so many more stories to heal, to fight, and to rise together.
Shocking discovery. The $50 million mistake. Welcome back, story lovers. Before we dive into a tale of catastrophic regret and second chances, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Now let's begin. 5 seconds to implosion. Gabriel's hands were trembling, slick with nervous sweat as he clutched the cold metal of the Mercedes-Benz keys. Through the panoramic window of the high-end dealership, the world outside was moving in slow motion. A woman walked by, her silhouette etched against the bright afternoon sun in San Diego, California. It was Charlotte. Beside her, a little boy skipped, his small, restless hands mirroring the anxious energy Gabriel saw in his own reflection every morning. The boy had his eyes, the same deep hazel, the same wide, curious forehead. "Mr. Davies, we just need your signature right here for the final transfer," the salesman chirped, pointing to a document. Gabriel didn't hear him. His focus was locked on the perfect, painfully familiar scene unfolding outside. Charlotte smiled down at the child, adjusting his Avengers backpack. "Leo, don't run into the street," she called as they passed the showroom entrance. The name hit Gabriel like a physical blow, punching the air from his lungs. Leo, the name they had chosen together 5 years ago, dreaming of a future he had so arrogantly discarded. The boy, Leo, pressed his face against the glass, leaving a small, foggy breath mark as he gazed at the gleaming luxury cars. Gabriel recognized that spark, the pure, mechanical fascination he'd inherited from his own grandfather. Charlotte gently pulled him away. "Come on, sweetie. We'll be late for the dentist." She bent low, speaking to him at eye level, the very gesture Gabriel had once watched her use when she was about to share a secret. 5 years of silence. 5 years of absence. 5 years where this child learned to talk, walk, and dream, all without his father. Gabriel watched them disappear into the traffic of Market Street. His perfectly controlled life, the multi-million-dollar tech company, the fiancé, the new luxury car he was buying for her, had just imploded in a matter of 5 seconds. He jumped up, leaving the untouched documents and the pristine Maybach behind. He had to find them. He had to know where Leo lived, where he went to school, and how Charlotte had built a world without him. The acid burn of guilt and regret scorched his throat. Ask yourself, if you were Gabriel, seeing the life you rejected standing right there, would you try to force your way back into it, knowing the damage you caused? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Chapter 1. The Imperial Arrogance. December 2019. Seattle, Washington. Ethan Davies strolled through the offices of his firm, Technova Solutions, with the confidence of a man who commanded a digital empire. At 30, his startup was a leading force in Pacific Northwest tech. His schedule was measured in strategic microseconds. 7 a.m. meetings, power lunches at the Fairmont, and dinners with venture capitalists. Charlotte Wells, meanwhile, was a marketing associate at a rival firm, Digital Peak. They met at a tech conference. Charlotte, with her delicate framed glasses, spoke passionately about the human side of digital connection, how tech should genuinely bring people together. "Do you really believe technology can be more human?" Ethan challenged her during the coffee break. Charlotte smiled, a slow, genuine curve of the lips. I believe everything can be more human when you put people first. Over the next 6 months, Ethan discovered a life beyond spreadsheets and closing deals. Charlotte introduced him to farmers markets, jazz clubs in the rain, and hikes in the Olympic National Forest. He loved her spontaneity. She laughed at his attempts to schedule romance. In July 2020, they moved into his high-rise condo in Belltown. Ethan, despite himself, organized the move with a business plan, a spreadsheet for budget, a timeline, and a section for emotional integration metrics. Charlotte brought life to the minimal penthouse, plants, books, and framed photos of their adventures. For the first time, Ethan felt he was coming home to a sanctuary, not just an address. Chapter 2. The Announcement, November 2020. Charlotte was 6 weeks pregnant when she got the news at her doctor's office. Pure joy quickly morphed into a knot of nerves. How would Ethan react? Ethan was deep in negotiations for a $50 million acquisition. The deal consumed him. He came home after 10 p.m., ate dinner while on conference calls, and worked late into the night. Charlotte's subtle attempts to open the conversation failed. "Ethan, when can we talk about our future plans?" she asked one Tuesday evening. He didn't look up from the contracts. "Charlotte, you know December is crucial for this acquisition. We can talk about anything else afterward." By December 17th, 2020, Charlotte was 10 weeks along. She knew she couldn't wait. Ethan was in his home office at 6 a.m., talking to Mistress. "Ethan, can you put the phone down for a few minutes? I need to tell you something important," she said, entering with a special breakfast tray. He held up 5 fingers, continuing his negotiation over stock percentages. 40 minutes later, he came into the kitchen, quickly eating the eggs rancheros. Charlotte took a deep breath. "Ethan, do you remember talking about having kids earlier in our relationship?" He stopped chewing, confused. "Kids? Charlotte, this is not the time. I am closing the biggest deal of my life. I'm 10 weeks pregnant." Silence descended. Ethan put his fork down, wiped his mouth, and stared at her as if she were speaking an alien language. "Are you joking?" Charlotte shook her head, pulling the lab results from her purse. "Our baby is due in July." Ethan shot up from the chair. "Charlotte, you cannot be serious. Not now. Not when I'm 2 weeks from closing the most critical acquisition for the firm." His voice was controlled, but ice cold. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Ethan, this is our child. It's a blessing." "A blessing? Do you understand the responsibility? I have 300 employees and millions in investor trust. I can't be distracted by—" He stopped, horrified at his own cruelty. Charlotte finished the sentence for him, her voice barely a whisper. "By your own son?" He paced the kitchen. "The timing is completely wrong. I need to travel to New York next month. I have meetings in Austin and Vegas. How am I supposed to do all that with a baby at home?" He was addressing a logistical problem, not a life-altering human event. As they argued, Ethan's phone rang. It was his partner, with an update on the American deal. Ethan answered instantly. "Rick, tell me you have good news." Charlotte watched as he effortlessly transformed back into the focused, ruthless executive. The pregnancy was now a secondary problem, a mere inconvenience. 30 minutes later, when he finally hung up, Charlotte had dried her tears and found a dangerous calm. "Where were we?" Ethan asked, returning to the table as if resuming a paused business meeting. "We were discussing our son, Ethan," she said, her voice firm. "And how you reacted to the news of becoming a father, as if I'd announced the company's bankruptcy." "People build careers and families every day," Charlotte pleaded. "Normal people, Charlotte. Not people running expanding tech firms," he countered, pacing like a caged animal. Charlotte stood up, grabbing her bag. "I'm going to stay with my sister Clara. I need to be with people who are happy when they receive good news." Ethan finally panicked. "Charlotte, stop. You don't have to be so dramatic. We can talk about this calmly." "Dramatic? She laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "You just told me our son is a timing issue, that your firm is more important than your family. You made your priorities perfectly clear." 15 minutes later, Charlotte walked out of the penthouse, carrying a small suitcase and her shattered dignity. Ethan's first instinct was to check his phone to make sure he hadn't missed any crucial investor messages. Pause and reflect. If you had to choose right now, which is more important? Legacy, career, wealth, power, or presence? Family, love, time. Let me know in the comments below. Chapter 3. The Secret Obsession. March 2024. San Diego. Charlotte was now a respected child psychologist at the Hope Clinic. Her office was decorated with colorful drawings from her young patients. She had earned her degree while pregnant and raising Leo alone. She was picking up Leo from the Cervantes Bilingual Academy. Leo, now 4, ran toward her with his backpack bouncing. "Mom, I learned about volcanoes today. They have super hot lava inside," he exclaimed, gesturing excitedly as they walked hand in hand down the sidewalk. As they passed a small park, Leo stopped, watching a father playing catch with his son. "Mom, why doesn't my dad play with me like that?" Leo's question was devastatingly innocent. Charlotte knelt beside him. "Remember, sweetie, Dad works very far away. Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices. But he loves me. Right, Mom?" The question pierced her heart. "Of course he loves you, my love. Very, very much," she lied, hugging him tight. After the shocking encounter at the dealership, Ethan canceled all non-essential meetings and hired a discreet private investigator. Within 48 hours, he had a complete report on Charlotte and Leo. He learned Leo was bright, curious, and sociable, but often asked about his absent father. Reading that detail was agonizing. His son had been growing up wondering about him, while he was expanding an empire that now felt hollow. Ethan began discreetly stalking their routine. He watched Charlotte enter the clinic, looking mature, confident, and independent. In the afternoons, he followed them to Leo's school. He watched his son run into his mother's arms, their bond palpable and powerful. He saw them at the grocery store, where Leo helped pick out fruit and asked, "Why do apples turn brown when you bite them?" Charlotte answered with infinite patience, turning every question into a lesson. He saw them at the park, Leo running, climbing, exploring. Charlotte, ever present, but allowing him the freedom to discover. Ethan felt a physical ache in his chest. He'd missed the first words, the first steps, the first scraped knees. His perfect controlled life was crumbling. But for the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He began researching parenthood, childhood development, and family psychology. He discovered Leo's school needed funding for a new science lab. Through an intermediary, Ethan anonymously donated $20,000 for our daughter. Microscopes and materials. Weeks later, the air conditioning at the Hope Clinic broke during a heat wave. The next morning, a repair technician showed up. "The service is fully paid for. Complete system replacement, 1 year of maintenance included. The person who hired me asked to remain anonymous, but said they know the important work you all do here." Charlotte felt a strange chill. 2 massive, targeted coincidences in a few months was too improbable. Don't miss out. We're halfway through, and the tension is rising. If you're invested in Ethan's journey, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Chapter 4. The Chance Encounter. September. Heavy rain turned the streets of San Diego into temporary rivers. Charlotte rushed to Leo's school just as the storm intensified. They huddled under a small awning with other families, but the rain wouldn't stop. "Excuse me, but do you need a ride?" Charlotte spun around. Gabriel, Ethan's original name, subtly kept as a nickname for this private interaction, stood there, holding a large umbrella. He looked as surprised as she was, as if he too had been caught off guard. "Gabriel," she breathed out. Leo looked up at the tall man talking to his mom. "Hello, little guy." Gabriel knelt down. "What's your name?" Charlotte quickly intervened. "This is Leo, my son. Leo, this is Gabriel, an acquaintance." Leo, polite, extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Gabriel." Gabriel shook his son's hand, an indescribable emotion flooding him. "The pleasure is all mine, Leo. That's a cool toy car. A '67 Mustang. You know cars?" Leo's eyes widened. "I do. I have a few at home." "We should take the ride, Mom. It's raining too hard," Leo said, ever practical. Charlotte hesitated, but the rain was relentless. "If it's no trouble." "None at all. My car is parked just outside." During the short ride to Charlotte's apartment, Leo and Gabriel chatted animatedly about cars, school, and dinosaurs. Gabriel listened with genuine interest. "Do you work with computers, Mr. Gabriel?" Leo asked. "Not exactly. I work with software. But I like cars as a hobby. My mom says my dad works with computers too, but he lives far away." Charlotte's blood ran cold. Gabriel met her eyes in the rearview mirror. The silence that followed was thick with 5 years of regret. Once inside the apartment, Charlotte signaled him to be quiet, while Leo changed his wet clothes. Ethan observed the small, cozy space, photos of Leo, organized toys, and books on child psychology. A home built with obvious love, despite financial constraints. "Charlotte, Gabriel started. "Not here, not now. Leo can hear." When Leo returned in dinosaur pajamas, he offered, "Mr. Gabriel, want to see my fossil collection? They're not real, but my mom bought them at a museum." Gabriel stayed for 2 hours, talking about everything. When it was time to leave, Leo held his hand at the door. "Can you come back tomorrow? I want to show you my book about space." "I'd love to, Leo," Gabriel promised, looking at Charlotte for silent approval. "I promise." Chapter 5. The Confrontation. The next morning, Gabriel called an emergency meeting with his partners. "I need to make some changes to my work routine," he announced. "I'm delegating more responsibility and drastically cutting my travel." His partner, Rick, was stunned. "Gabriel, we have huge deals coming up. The European market is opening." Gabriel shook his head. "I know, Rick, but I've found something more important than business expansion. I've found my family." He began freeing up his afternoons and nights. He studied child development and parenting techniques. One Saturday, he called Charlotte. "I'd like to invite you and Leo to lunch tomorrow. Nothing formal." Charlotte hesitated. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Gabriel." "Charlotte, I have a lot to explain, a lot to apologize for, but Leo is my son, and I want to know him, if you'll let me." She finally sighed. "Fine. Lunch only, nothing more." The next day at the restaurant, the conversation was natural until Leo got distracted coloring. "Charlotte, I know you have 1,000 reasons not to trust me, but I need you to know, I have fundamentally changed." "Changed?" she countered coldly. "You abandoned your son before he was even born. That's not something you just change overnight." "You're right," he admitted, dropping his voice. "I was selfish, immature, and completely irresponsible. I prioritized ambition over the family we could have built. I have no excuses." Leo looked up. "Mom, why are you sad?" The tension was too much for the child's young mind. Gabriel made a definitive choice. He knelt beside Leo's chair. "Leo, you know your mom loves you very much, right?" Leo nodded. "And sometimes," Gabriel continued, carefully choosing his words, "dads make huge mistakes, mistakes that hurt the people they love the most." Charlotte held her breath. "Leo, I need to tell you something very important. I am your dad." The silence was deafening. Leo blinked, processing the information. "You're my dad?" he whispered. Gabriel nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "Yes, Leo, I am your dad, and I made the biggest mistake of my life by not being here when you were born." Leo looked at Charlotte, then back at Gabriel. "Why didn't you stay with Mom and me?" The simple, direct question from a 4-year-old weighed more than any one-adult accusation. Because I was foolish, Leo. I thought work was more important than family. I was very, very wrong. Leo paused for a long moment, absorbing the truth. But you're here now, he finally said, with the simple logic of a child. I'm here now, Gabriel confirmed. And if your mom allows it, I'd like to stay. Forever. Leo looked at Charlotte, hope shining in his eyes. Mom, can my dad stay? Charlotte felt the tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. Chapter 6. The Gift of Presence. For the next 3 months, their relationship was structured, scheduled, and focused entirely on Leo. Gabriel showed up for every Saturday visit, every time exactly on time, and left precisely when agreed upon. He brought no extravagant gifts, only educational items like science books and puzzles. Charlotte watched from the sofa, her initial rage slowly giving way to cautious respect. Gabriel was consistent, present, and reliable. He learned Leo's favorite bedtime story, his fears and his dreams. One evening, Charlotte and Gabriel sat on the balcony after putting Leo to bed. Gabriel, what truly changed you? She asked. This transformation seems too profound to be just guilt. Gabriel looked out at the city lights. When I saw you two at the dealership, I realized I'd built a life based on what I thought would make me happy. Success, money, recognition. None of it warmed my heart, like seeing Leo smile for the first time. I finally understood that family isn't an obstacle to success. Family is the success. December 20th, 2024. Gabriel arrived with a small box and an envelope. Inside the envelope were legal documents, official recognition of paternity, a will, and a $500,000 educational trust for Leo. This is not to impress you, he explained. It's because Leo deserves financial security for his future, regardless of what happens between us. He then opened the small box, revealing not an engagement ring, but a delicate necklace with a double heart pendant. Charlotte, I'm not asking you to marry me, or to go back to what we were. I'm asking for a chance to build something new, based on who we are today. Honest answer, Charlotte challenged him, looking him in the eye. If the business opportunity of your life comes tomorrow, but it means less time with Leo, what do you choose? Gabriel didn't hesitate. Leo. Always Leo. I learned no amount of money is worth a lost afternoon with my son. And with me? Charlotte's voice was vulnerable. If I give you this chance and things get hard, will you run again? Gabriel held her hands. Charlotte, I promise I will never run again when things get complicated. I promise to be present and to be better. Every single day. Leo burst into the room. Mom, Dad, are you dating? Charlotte looked at Gabriel, then at her radiant son, and finally made her decision. Yes, Leo, we are going to try. Slowly, carefully, but we are going to try. Leo jumped for joy, hugging them both. Gabriel gently kissed Charlotte's forehead. Thank you for bringing me back home. Meaningful ending. Coming home. Christmas Eve, 2024. The small apartment was decorated with simple, handmade ornaments. For the first time in 5 years, they celebrated as a family. Leo was radiant, wearing a sweater Charlotte had knitted. During dinner, Gabriel raised a glass of cider. I want to thank Charlotte for the chance to know the most incredible son in the world, and for having the patience with a man who took years to learn what truly matters in life. Charlotte raised her glass. And I thank Gabriel for showing that people can change when they find the real reason to do it. Leo raised his mug of hot chocolate. And I thank both of you for having my dad and mom together, at last. That night, as Gabriel read Leo a bedtime story, the boy made a special request. Dad, will you be here when I wake up tomorrow? Gabriel kissed his forehead. I will be here when you wake up, Leo. And the day after that. Forever. Leo smiled, finally secure that his father would never disappear again. On the balcony, Charlotte leaned her head on Gabriel's shoulder, watching the quiet city lights. "Gabriel," she whispered, "the most amazing thing is that Leo never doubted you were his father, even before he knew the truth. It's like he always knew." Gabriel squeezed her hand. "Perhaps love recognizes love, Charlotte, even when it's lost." I invite you to leave your thoughts on this powerful story in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey of redemption, share it and hit that subscribe button to support our work. Another heart-touching story is appearing on your screen now. Don't miss it. The first quarter, new challenges, and old ghosts. The test of normalcy. The new year, 2025, ushered in a quiet, committed routine. Ethan, Charlotte, and Leo were building a life defined by presence, not just promises. Ethan made sure he was home every night for dinner by 6 p.m., helping Leo with his homework projects, or simply reading books on the couch. Charlotte watched him, her heart slowly shedding the armor it had worn for 5 years. One afternoon, Ethan volunteered to bring snacks for Leo's class at the Cervantes Academy. He arrived in a simple black SUV, leaving the Maybach safely parked at his condo. He wore a simple polo shirt, a stark contrast to the custom suits he usually favored. However, the change didn't go unnoticed in his former world. "Ethan, you're looking well, but we need to talk." It was Rick, his business partner, waiting for him outside Leo's classroom door. Rick looked stressed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "What is it, Rick? You know I schedule personal time in the afternoons now." Rick lowered his voice, glancing at the line of parents. "The European expansion we were planning. It's back on the table, and they need the CEO to lead the negotiations in London for at least 3 weeks. If we don't close this, our competitor will." The words struck Ethan with an uncomfortable familiarity. London. 3 weeks. His career, his legacy, all demanding his attention now. "I can't go, Rick. I'm not leaving my family for 3 weeks right now. Delegate the initial stages to Maria. She's ready." Rick scoffed, a mixture of disbelief and genuine frustration in his voice. "Delegate? Ethan, this is a multi-million-dollar opportunity. We built this together, and now you're trading the chance to become a global firm for playdates and juice boxes." The old Ethan would have been packing his suitcase already. The new Ethan felt a cold certainty. "My priorities have changed, Rick. Technova is secure, but my family needs my time. Send Maria and tell her I'll support the strategy remotely. And if you have a problem with that, then maybe it's time you found a new CEO." Rick walked away, visibly angry, leaving a chilling threat hanging in the air. "You're making a mistake, Ethan. A huge one, and you might not be able to undo it." Leo's questions and Charlotte's fears the unpacking. As Ethan navigated the professional challenges, a deeper, more personal challenge was brewing at home. Leo, now fully embracing the presence of his father, started asking the inevitable questions. One Saturday morning, while Ethan was helping him build a complicated Lego Millennium Falcon, Leo paused, holding a tiny figure of Han Solo. "Dad, you said you were foolish before, right?" Leo asked, his voice serious. "Yes, buddy, the most foolish man in the world. Why was it better to be foolish and go to work instead of being here with me and Mom?" Ethan swallowed hard. Charlotte, who was making coffee, froze in the kitchen doorway. This was it. The painful unpacking of the past 5 years. "It wasn't better, Leo, it was worse," Ethan said, setting down the Lego instructions. "I thought that the things I could buy with work were more important than the time I could give. I was wrong. I was living a life that was empty, like a big, beautiful mansion with no furniture inside. You and your mom are the furniture, the warmth, the everything." Leo looked at him, not entirely satisfied, but understanding the sincerity. "So you won't go back to being foolish?" "Never again, Leo, never again." Charlotte felt a knot in her chest loosen. Ethan wasn't dodging the hard truth. He was facing it, not just for her, but for Leo. Later that week, Charlotte confessed her lingering anxiety to Ethan. "Rick's visit scares me, Ethan. You were ruthless in business. If that London deal goes through someone else, won't you start regretting this? Won't the pressure get to you, and won't you resent us for it?" Ethan took her hands. "Charlotte, the moment I saw Leo at that dealership, my definition of winning changed. I don't need a global firm. I need a family that trusts me. If the cost of keeping my family is losing a business deal, then that's a cost I'm happy to pay. Because this right here," he squeezed her hands, "is the only legacy that truly matters. The ultimate test, a betrayal and a choice. The corporate backlash. By late spring, the corporate world had responded. Rick, seeing Ethan's commitment to family as a weakness, engineered a hostile move. He quietly organized a meeting with the board of directors, presenting Ethan's refusal to travel for the European expansion as loss of focus and negligence. One Tuesday morning, the call came. Ethan Davies was officially voted out as CEO of Technova Solutions. Ethan received the news while he was at Leo's school, helping set up a booth for the school's annual science fair. He read the email, the cold, curt language of his professional demise, and felt a strange calm. He was jobless, effectively stripped of the empire he had built from scratch. Charlotte saw the change in his face when he hung up the phone. "What is it, Ethan?" "Rick got what he wanted," Ethan said simply. "I'm out. I'm no longer the CEO." Charlotte's face fell, not in accusation, but in deep fear. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? That was your life." Ethan looked across the gym floor at Leo, who was beaming, proudly showing off his baking soda volcano to the principal. He smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "I'm going to focus on my real job, Charlotte, being a dad." The loss of the company was painful. Yes, a massive blow to his ego and bank account, but it was also a cleansing. The last, biggest obstacle to his commitment had been removed, violently. He was now fully, irrevocably, devoted to his family. "We'll figure this out," Charlotte whispered, taking his hand. "I already have," he replied. "I still have all my engineering contacts, and I have a great idea for a consulting firm that lets me work from home. We're financially secure, and I'm free. Free to be here." The meaningful ending. 6 months later, on a cool autumn afternoon, Ethan stood in the doorway of Leo's room. Leo was asleep, his Millennium Falcon perched on his nightstand. Ethan and Charlotte sat on the small balcony, holding hands. "You never regretted it, did you?" Charlotte asked softly. "Losing the company, all that power?" Ethan shook his head, looking up at the clear sky. "I regretted not being here for 5 years. That's the only regret that matters. I thought success was a destination I had to build alone. Now I know that success is the journey we take together." He turned to her, placing a hand gently on her cheek. "I lost an empire, but I found my home, Charlotte, and that is the better deal." She leaned into his touch. The past was a painful teacher, but the present was a quiet, earned reward. They had rebuilt a foundation strong enough to withstand any storm. Final question for the audience. Ethan lost his multi-million-dollar business to save his family. Was Rick's ruthlessness ultimately a gift that forced Ethan into his true purpose? Let me know what you think. And if you loved this dramatic conclusion, please hit the like button and check out our next story about finding redemption. The Rebuild. A new legacy of ethics. A different kind of empire. The initial shock of losing Technova quickly faded, replaced by a deep sense of liberation. Ethan Davies, the former tech titan, was now a fixture at the Cervantes Academy, known not for his wealth, but for his uncanny ability to explain complex algebra to fourth graders. He established Nexus Consulting, a boutique firm operating out of his apartment. Its mission was radically simple: high-value, ethical tech strategy for socially conscious startups. No more ruthless acquisitions, just genuine partnership. This new reality meant a complete role reversal. Ethan was present, available, and managing the household finances and logistics. This shift gave Charlotte the space she desperately needed to expand her career. She decided to pursue her long-held dream of writing a book, leveraging her clinical experience with children and her personal journey. "I want to write about the power of presence in parenting," she told Ethan one night. "How a child's emotional growth depends less on wealth and more on the parent simply being there." Ethan, accustomed to commanding hundreds of employees, was now her chief editor and logistics manager. He tracked her deadlines, managed the submissions to publishing houses, and ensured she had quiet time to write. "I used to think controlling the market was the ultimate power," he mused, looking over her manuscript. "Now I see the power is in enabling someone you love to achieve their potential. You're going to help so many people, Charlotte." Leo, now 5, thrived in the stable environment. He brought his father to school for career day, introducing him simply as, "My dad, he helps people solve hard problems from our kitchen." It was a title Ethan wore with more pride than CEO. The ghost of Rick. A ruthless blow just as Nexus Consulting began to gain traction. A familiar ghost from the past materialized. Rick, now the sole, ruthless leader of Technova, saw Ethan's low-key success as an insult. When a lucrative government contract was almost awarded to Nexus, Rick deployed his old corporate tactics. A formal lawsuit was filed against Ethan, alleging misappropriation of intellectual property from his time at Technova. The suit was flimsy, but financially crippling. "He knows this is baseless, Ethan," Charlotte said, pacing the living room, fear etched on her face. "He's just trying to drain your money and your time. He wants to drag you back to that old life." The stress was immense. Legal bills mounted quickly, and Ethan had to choose between fighting a prolonged, costly battle or settling and risking Nexus's reputation. The old Ethan would have fought dirty, using every legal loophole to crush Rick. The new Ethan made a different choice. "I won't fight him on his terms, Charlotte. That man lives in a prison of his own making, defined by zero-sum games," Ethan stated calmly. "If I respond with anger, I put that poison back into our home." He instructed his legal team to prepare a transparent, fact-based defense, refusing any retaliatory moves. Most importantly, he drew a hard line. The lawsuit would not consume his time with Leo. He moved all legal calls to late evenings, after Leo was asleep, and weekends were strictly reserved for family, as always. "I promised Leo I wouldn't be foolish again," Ethan reminded Charlotte. Putting work, even a lawsuit, above his well-being would be breaking that promise. "We'll fight this with integrity, and if Nexus has to close, we'll start something else. Our real asset is here." He gestured around the small, warm apartment. The permanent foundation, the symbol of home. 6 months into the legal battle, Charlotte's book, The Parent's Presence, Reclaiming Family Time in the Digital Age, was picked up by a major publisher. Her story, the successful, driven woman who prioritized her child's emotional health, resonated deeply. The advance, coupled with Nexus Consulting's solid, ethical income stream, allowed them to take a monumental step. September 2026. On a sunny Saturday morning, they pulled up to a charming 2-story house with a small, grassy yard in a quiet San Diego suburb. "This is it, Leo," Charlotte said, smiling. "Our new home." Leo ran straight to the yard, envisioning a place for soccer, a dog, and maybe even a small garden. Ethan stood beside Charlotte, holding a set of new keys. "The bank approved the loan this morning, Charlotte. Everything's finalized." Charlotte looked up at the house, a tangible representation of their renewed commitment. It was a modest home, nothing like the Belltown penthouse, but it felt infinitely more valuable. "You know, Rick's lawyer called yesterday," Ethan said, his voice level. "They saw the new consulting contracts, and decided the lawsuit wasn't fiscally viable anymore. They dropped it. Charlotte didn't react with triumph, just a quiet understanding. He finally realized you couldn't be broken by money or pressure anymore, Ethan. You found the real power source. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, watching Leo try to climb a mature oak tree in the front yard. I lost a building, Charlotte, but I found the foundation, he whispered. This house is built on a truth that no business deal can ever shake. Forever present. Years passed. Leo turned 10. He was a thoughtful, sharp-witted boy, curious about science, and utterly confident in his parents' love. Charlotte's book became a national bestseller, transforming her into a sought-after speaker. Ethan's Nexus Consulting was thriving, operating globally while allowing him to maintain firm boundaries around family time. One evening, Leo was looking at a framed photo on the wall, a picture of Ethan and Charlotte from their early, carefree dating days before Leo was born. "Dad, you look so serious in this picture," Leo observed. "Like you had the whole world, but you didn't know how to smile yet." Ethan walked over, putting an arm around his son's shoulder. "I was smiling on the inside, Leo, but I was focused on the wrong things. I thought happiness was something I had to achieve. You and your mom taught me it's something I just have to be present for." He looked at Charlotte, who was watching them from the kitchen, her eyes warm with love. "Always be present, buddy," Ethan advised his son. "The greatest victories are the ones that happen right here, in the quiet moments." And that is the final chapter of Ethan and Charlotte's journey. They proved that true redemption requires sacrificing the old ego to build a new, ethical life centered on love. What do you think of Ethan's final transformation and the new beginning in their home? Drop your comments below and hit like if this story of redemption moved you.